Hello, and today we're going to begin our tutorials in R, which is a open source statistical package. And I'm going to begin these short tutorials from the perspective of a psychology student, given that I have a psychology background, and assuming that you have some knowledge of basic descriptive statistics and inferential statistics, and from the point of view of somebody who might be used to using or who's recently been introduced to SPSS. And I'm going to talk to you about why you might use R in this first tutorial and how you begin downloading, installing it, and just working with data. And then we'll progress from there in later videos. So why might you want to use R instead of another package like SPSS or Spss? Well, one of the reasons, first of all, is that it's free. So while people have access to SPSS in university, for example, it's not always the case once they go outside the university campus, or when they leave university, they don't always have access to SPSS. So working with a free package means that they can always have it available. Second of all, when you work with closed source software or packaged software, you have to work with proprietary data files. So anybody who's tried to open a SPSS file from an older version, for example, with a newer version of SPSS or vice versa, and it hasn't worked, you know some of the complications that can arise with using specific types of data files like SAV files, for example. And what's great about R is that it doesn't convert your data files into an unusable format that you can't use with another program. And also it can import SPSS files that you can use with R and other types of data files. Another reason is that it's constantly updated and maintained. It's used in the wider scientific community, so having a knowledge of R is a good tool to have. And also from a statistics point of view, is it gets you into understanding what's going on behind the scenes. So I've seen a lot of students, for example, who the way they learn to do statistics is learning how to click the buttons in the graphical user interface, and they think that when they click the buttons and they know the sequence, that they understand what's happening in the background, which of course isn't the case. And while R doesn't necessarily teach you statistics, what it does do is that you have to be aware of what commands you're typing in order to carry out the analysis. So by being aware of what commands you're typing and seeing them written on the screen, you have to have some knowledge of what's going on in the background, and it kind of prompts you to go in deeper and understand what's happening. So there are the reasons why you might use R or learn to use R in conjunction with other statistics programs, definitely, even if you don't just use it on its own. So R is available from the R project, and you can see on my screen here we've got a web page open, cran.r-project.org, and you can download it for Linux, Mac OS X, or Windows. I'm going to be working on Windows because I'll assume that most students have a Windows machine. Although I'm a big fan of Linux and Mac OS X, I'll work primarily in Windows and assume that if you understand how I'm working in Windows, you can translate that to the different operating systems. So when you download it from here, it installs in the same way that a standard Windows program installs. So there's no need to go through those processes. And what I'll do is I'll flick straight to the R console, which is what you see when you start the program. And you'll notice straight away that it's different, again, from SPSS, in the sense that it's not a graphical user interface. You don't click a series of buttons in order to get your statistics done. You type your commands here into the workspace, into the interface, should I say. And you have some menus here at the top whereby you can load scripts. We'll talk about scripts later on. Scripts are a series of commands that if you use them over and over again, you can save them, and instead of having to type them out again, you can just automate them, a series of statistics. Imagine that you might want to organize your data in a certain way, then you might want to run standard descriptive statistics like mean and standard deviation, and then you know, for example, that you might want to run a two-way ANOVA. And if you're doing that over and over again, you can save those in a script, and then you can just load them and run them again. The workspace contains all of the data associated with the set of analysis that you're working on right now, and that can be everything from the list of commands that you've typed in to the data that you've imported to the output of your statistics, and all of those are saved in the workspace. And if you load a workspace, you can call them all back up again. And you'll see how that works when we go through that in later videos. You can also load and save the history of the commands you've entered. So if you've entered in first that you want to, for example, see the mean and the standard deviation, and then you want to just check and see, okay, did I find the mean and standard deviation of this variable or the other variable, or what did I do? You can actually just go back through the history of your commands, or if you know you're going to be working with the same set of commands over and over again and you haven't written a script, you can save the history and then you can start working it into a script that you can load again. Change directory is important, and this is one thing we're actually going to do now, is that if you are working with a set of data, for example, and it's in a particular folder, it's not always in your C drive, for example, or on your desktop. It's easier if you change the directory, the working directory, to where the data is, so that R works from there. And that means that you don't have to type in a really long pathway to your data like C/:, my documents, etc., etc. You just change the directory and say, this is the folder I'm working from. And that way, if your data file, for example, is called data.txt, you can say load data.txt instead of load C/my documents.txt and so on. So the first thing, I've already done it. What you want to do is you want to change the directory to where your data file is. You press change directory, and you'll see here what I've done is I've gone into YouTube videos and R2 that's where my data file is, and I press OK. And that means that this is the directory I'm working from. So I'm not going to go through all of these menu options. You can see yourself that they're fairly standard for most Windows programs, except for the package menu, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Okay, so let's imagine you've started working with we've changed our working directory to where our data is going to be located. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the data file that we're going to be working with today. You can see here that we have a standard data file with 3 columns. So we've got 3 variables. The first one is sex or gender. We've got males and females, as we might expect. And we've got a column of before and after. And let's imagine that these are the amount of correctly recalled items in a memory test. And in the first instance, we have before a specific training technique was implemented, and then we have after. So we can see that it's a dependent measures or repeated measures design. This participant number 1, for example, before they were given the memory technique, they recalled 4 items, and after they recalled 17. So we're not going to worry too much about the methodology of the experiment or how good it is or not. We're just going to understand what type of data we have first. And one of the things that you'll notice is that this data is saved in a text file, and it's separated by spaces, and these spaces are tabs. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's imagine there's no space between this column, and I'm pressing the tab key, which is the one just above caps lock, to separate it. That's important because not all data files are separated by tabs. But if you've outputted it from something like Superlab, it's separated by something. It's either separated by a blank space, which is just a space bar, or usually a tab, or it could be a comma. And knowing that is important when we input the data into R. So we can tell it, okay, what separates your columns? So we've got data.txt. That's the name of my text file. And I'm going to go back into the Workspace, the R interface, I should call it. And I'm going to import this data so that we can work with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy in the command to import this data. And what you would do is you would type it in and press enter. And I'm going to explain what the command actually means. So what you would do is you would type in my data. Now, what it means on the left where it says my data is just the name of the data file that we can reference in it from R. So I could call it anything. We could call it my data. We could call it my data number 1. We could call it recalled items data, anything we want. This is just the name of the item or the variable that we could, that we can recall later on whenever we want to refer to this data. And this arrow here, which is the arrow pointing left, and this dash, and you just make them with a standard arrow key or less than key on your keyboard and a standard dash, is an assignment operator, which just means this new data file called my data, it comes from or is equal to data.txt, which is the name of my data file that you saw earlier on. It says here that there is a header in the file, and what that means is, if we flick back to the data file, it means that the first line is telling you the name of the columns. So if we didn't have this first line, we'd say header is false because there's no name. But in this case, the header is true. And the next one is the separator. So we talked a minute ago about this, the file being separated by, and you can see this /t or \t means it's separated by a tab. So each column is separated by a tab. It could also be separated, for example, by a comma if we wanted, or if it was, or by a space. But what we have here is it's separated by a tab. Now this read table command that it's all encased in just means read it. For now I'm just going to explain it as read it in a table format. In other words, there are rows and columns. There are lots of different ways to lay out your data in R, and we're not going to go into them in this video, but we will go later on. For now, you just need to know that read.table means that we're reading it in a table format with rows and columns. So I've typed in this command. I know that my data is going to be called my data, and I know where it came from. I'll press enter, and okay, what have we got? Duplicate row names are not allowed. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I actually had an error, so I had to pause the video, where I didn't have a tab separating my data. In fact, on this column here, it was only separated by a space, so I got an error which said that R didn't understand my data. So I had to make sure that it was separated by a tab and not just just a regular spacebar press. And once I figured that out, I typed in the same command, my data, read table, data.text, the header is true and the separator is a tab, and I got no error message. And you don't get a confirmation when you import data into R, you just get no error message. But what you can do to check, and this is true of any variable or piece of information in R, that you've entered it in correctly, is that you type in the name of the item that you're looking for example, my data, and you'll see that the data is now imported into R for us to use whatever way we want. So you can see that these are just row names. So we didn't assign them, R just assigned them automatically. This is, for example, the ID of a participant. In the same way that SPSS, on the very left hand side of SPSS, and just to the left of the leftmost column, has a row number. This is the same here. We can see that we've got our sex or gender variable here, we've got before and we've got after, and we can now use this data in whichever way we want to. Now, one of the things we need to address is that not everybody has a text file like this when they're working with R. They might be coming from SPSS, and it's also possible to import SPSS files. And although I don't have one here, I'm going to show you how it would work, because this is a good way for us to introduce the concept of packages. And packages are extra functionality that you can have in R that people have written or developed, and you can then install them as such and use them. There are packages for specific areas that people use, certain types of statistics. So if you're in a particular field of science, there might be certain statistics that you would use. Someone has written a package that could help you automate them or package them together. And one of them, for example, is Psych, the Psych package, that gives us descriptive statistics in a way that we like in psychology. And how you load packages in Windows is simple. You just go to Packages. We go to first, we need to install a package before we can load it. And what we get here is where do we want to install it from. It's not really relevant unless you've got a slow internet connection. You pick somewhere that's near you. I'm just going to press OK. And what I'm looking for to work with SPSS, I'm looking for a package called foreign. What that means is we can install or we can import data from foreign software that's not R. And that's not just SPSS, but different software as well. So I'm going down all the way here to look for the foreign package. Nearly there. You can't jump forward in this. It doesn't work. Okay, so there we go. So this is the foreign package, and this is how you install it. You just press OK. It downloads. This is the download window. Very quick. And it's installed, and now all we need to do is load it. So we tell R that we're using this package, and these are all packages that are already installed. Some of them already installed, some of them I installed. We're going to load the foreign package, and now it's loaded. So how do we import data from SPSS? Well, I'm going to show you the command. As I said, I don't have an SPSS file, but it works in the same way as what we just did, except it looks like this. So you've got, again, you can call your data whatever you want. I'll assume you're going to call it my data. You've got the assignment operator here, and what the command is read.spss, and then in brackets and in quotation marks, you're going to put the pathway to your file. So if it's in a particular folder in the C directory, then you put it like this. If it's in the same folder as your working directory, you have it like this, just the name and .sav, and that will import it, and it will look then the same way as our file that you can see on the screen. So that's the first introduction to R, where to get it, how to install it. We talked about what R looks like. We talked a little bit about packages. We talked about how to import data from a text file and from SPSS. And next, we'll start working a little bit more with commands, with the workspace, and with descriptive statistics. But that's all for now.